Greetings and welcome to America on Trial, where legal experts unpack the most pressing issues of today. My name is Gidra Stasionaitė. I am an immigration attorney based in Miami, Florida. And let me introduce the panel. We have Adam Lampanero, an attorney, published author, and also law professor at Georgia College. We have Jeff Teichert, Assistant Attorney General for the state of Utah. And finally, we have Fernando Lian, a New York attorney. And today on trial is an affirmative action. Based on the current situation, it seems that the conservative majority of the Supreme Court is ready to put affirmative action to rest. Yet at what cost? Today we're going to be discussing exactly that. Adam, as an expert in constitutional law, could you give us a table talk on affirmative action and what has been done in the past and how did we get where we are today?
Sure. In Bakke versus Regents of California in 1976, the Supreme Court held that race could be considered as one factor in a holistic admissions process, so that race could be considered when deciding to admit someone into college or a graduate school, but it couldn't be a predominant factor or the only factor. It had to be part of a holistic admissions process. In Grutz and Gratter versus Bollinger in 1992, the Supreme Court affirmed Bakke and also emphasized that race cannot be a predominant factor. It has to just be one of many factors in deciding who to admit to an undergraduate or graduate program. And then in Fisher versus Texas in 2016, the Supreme Court reaffirmed this ruling and also said that we should defer to universities in their determination of when race should be taken into account. And I will say this country has a history of racism, and that racism has led to economic and social inequality. So it is perfectly appropriate to take race into account to remedy these wrongs and to create a diverse class where people of different backgrounds can share diverse perspectives. So the Supreme Court striking down affirmative action is not only inconsistent with the Constitution, it's bad policy.
Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, in 2016, the Supreme Court Justice Kennedy was the one who saved the affirmative action. Today, we have a conservative court that is very eager to pick up two cases. One is against University of Harvard, alleging discrimination of Asian students, and another one is against University of North Carolina. What do you think, Jeff? Do you think that Supreme Court has an agenda of reaching certain decision?
Well, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution says that the government cannot deny anyone equal protection of the laws. Now, in the context, that was a post-Civil War amendment passed similar in time to the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery. I think in the context of the time and the history of the amendment, the 14th Amendment, if it means anything, means that race is irrelevant. So on the one hand, we're saying we want equality. We want people treated equally. And then secondly, but if you were treated less than equal in the past, maybe we're going to give you a boost. Now, I think that's fundamentally inconsistent. If I can just say one more thing, it reminds me of George Orwell's book Animal Farm, where it says, where the phrase comes up, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And I think that's affirmative action. I think it's fundamentally wrong. We should be promoting a colorblind society.
So Jeff, when you're saying that when 14th Amendment was drafted in 19th century, that at that time the drafters were colorblind and they did not see what was the racial situation in America?
Well, I think what they passed was saying you got to treat everyone equally regardless of race.
Fernando, do you agree with that perception that drafters, when they were drafting the 14th Amendment, did not take in consideration the color?
No, I don't know what kumbaya world Jeff lives in. The air in Utah must be really thin and it affects his thinking process. I'm not sure what's going on. But when the amendment was passed, I think separate but equal is still in existence, and Black people had to use would sit in the back of the bus. They would go to separate bathrooms. They would have segregated schools, so on and so forth. So this concept that, things should be colorblind and the rest is nonsense. People see color all the time, and there have to be law. And I agree with Adam that it would be insanity to strike it down, because the minute you strike it down, guess what? They are going to start figuring out ways to keep out Polish people, Italian people, Hispanics, whites, blacks, old people, young people. I think there was one decision, and I think it goes along these lines. Wasn't there one decision in the 70s, a Vietnam vet who couldn't get into medical school because he was too old at the age of 35 or something out in California? And they kind of decided it under these affirmative action laws. So guess what? And he was white. Those who are in power will figure out a way to keep others out of power. And that's why you need affirmative action laws in place to try and at least level the playing field.
Fernando, so do you think that having affirmative action would be treating equally the white students in comparison to the minority students by giving certain position or more positions to attend the university based on the color?
Well, yes, because here's the thing. Affirmative action isn't that, oh, all of a sudden you're a woman, you get a spot. All of a sudden you're black, you get a spot. It's, hey, we're going to put you in there and let you compete with the others. Whereas before these laws were in place, they wouldn't even accept your application. Hence why we have an entire college system, an entire black college system in universities like Howard, right? These all started because of that reason. Sorry, Gidry.
No, thank you, Fernando. Adam, would you agree to that? Do you think that people cannot handle themselves certain admission policy and making themselves more diverse? Do you think that affirmative action is the best tool for us to have in order to maintain such diversity, as Fernando mentioned?
Well, I think that ideally, I would agree with Jeff that it would be great if we could live in a colorblind society. But the fact of the matter is, we don't. Our country has a history of terrible discrimination against African Americans up until the 60s with Jim Crow laws and segregation. And the effect of that was that it created economic and social inequality. And the Supreme Court, in a case called San Antonio School District versus Rodriguez, said that school funding could be based on property taxes, which meant that wealthy white communities were sending kids to much better schools than poor black communities. So it led to an inherent disadvantage educationally, socially, and economically. Affirmative action tries to remedy that by doing two things: giving people an opportunity by considering race as one of many factors in the admissions process, and number two, by diversifying classes so that people can hear perspectives and learn from people of different backgrounds. The problem, though, Gidry, is this with affirmative action. Some schools weigh race too much. They sometimes weigh it as the sole or only factor. That's wrong, and that shouldn't be allowed. But the consideration of race, given our history and given the benefits of diversity, should be considered as one part of a holistic admissions process.
So Adam, you're saying that it should be considered, but based on the conduct and composition of the Supreme Court, it looks like the Supreme Court is going to destroy, to eliminate the affirmative action. What do you think would be the consequence of that? And do you think that that's likely to happen?
Well, the consequence of that is you're going to have less diverse classes. Less African Americans are going to get admitted to colleges. But I also want to raise one other important point, and this is a point against affirmative action. Affirmative action also, as Richard Sander from Stanford has stated, creates what's called a mismatch. It allows students to get into institutions when they are not necessarily qualified to be at those institutions, and that applies regardless of race, whether you're white, black, Hispanic. And those students who would otherwise succeed at lower ranked schools wind up being in the bottom of their class at higher ranked schools, and then they struggle to get jobs and incur crushing debt. So that's the
Adam,
consequence of affirmative action.
isn't this issue, this is a small issue that we could, could be justified for the better good, for the better understanding and consequence of affirmative action?
Well, yes, I think that race should be one part, not the sole or predominant part, of a holistic admissions process to right past wrongs and increase diversity.
Jeff, I'm very, very curious to hear your opinion. It seems like you are supporting the Supreme Court's lenience to take the decision against the affirmative action. What do you think the consequence would be of that, and what could be in place, if anything, of the affirmative action as we know of it?
Well, I don't claim to know what the Supreme Court is going to do, but let me say this. First of all, Adam's last little colloquy reminded me of something Justice Clarence Thomas said. He said he graduated from Yale and his diploma wasn't worth the paper it was printed on because everyone assumed he was an affirmative action candidate to law school. Now, he ultimately did get a job, a relatively low-paying job at first, but he said that he believed there was an asterisk by his name with his degree, basically, because, one of those things that everybody knows is that black people won't get admitted without affirmative action, and that's insulting to black people. Second issue, all these examples that Fernando gave come from the decision Plessy versus Ferguson, which was separate but equal. And that didn't happen contemporaneous with the 14th Amendment. It came much later. And of course, that had to be corrected in Brown versus Board of Education, which I believe rightly corrected the decision of separate but equal to no, separate is not equal. And again, I don't think we're going to get past the problems of racial division by emphasizing race all the time. Simply disagree with my co-panelists on that.
Jeff, so are you aware of any states? Because in some states, affirmative action has been just eliminated. Do you know of any examples, any colleges or universities that maintain the numbers for the minority students after affirmative action has been eliminated?
I don't know specifically on that. I will give a counterexample, though. The law school where I went, I have a JD and an LLM, but the law school where I went for my JD, the year that they had come under fire for not admitting enough women, and the year that I applied and was admitted, they literally accepted every woman that applied. And there were 6 or 8 of them that were not even remotely qualified and washed out at the end of the first year. Did affirmative action, did that work in their favor? Was that a kind, good, uplifting thing to do? Or was it making people pawns in a political argument and doing them a disservice by putting them in a law class they weren't qualified to be in?
Fernando, do you agree with what Jeff is saying, mentioning 6 or 8 persons who were not successful after being admitted versus opportunity for the underprivileged, underserved people to try whether to see they succeed? And have you heard of 209 proposal in California that eliminated affirmative action? And we have the statistics of some of the universities, such as Berkeley, that indicated that since elimination of affirmative action, the admission of minority, African American, and Latino students was less than 50%. What do you think about that?
So in terms of 209, I have heard about it, but I didn't read that much about it, in all honesty. So I really don't feel comfortable speaking to it. But I will say eliminating it, I do, even though Berkeley is a communist institution in my book, I will agree with their numbers, because that's pretty much what's going to start to happen. In terms of Jeff's example, You don't know why those women washed out. You don't know if they washed out because the pressure of law school got to them. You don't know if they washed out because they just weren't smart enough to be there. You don't know the reasons why they washed out. I know plenty of intelligent people that I went to law school with who just couldn't hack it after the first year. And it was too crushing for them and they left. They washed out on their own. Yet a
Good
dummy
point,
like me made it
Fernando.
through all 3 years with no problems because
Good
I
point,
didn't let the
Fernando.
pressure get to me.
And that's why you're a common sense commentator. I always will repeat to that. Thank you for taking us to that reality. Um, Adam, I have a question for you. Do you think that there are certain alternatives for affirmative action, such as, let's say, eliminating the state scores? Because we know, and it's known that underprivileged schools, students tend to score lower than the other schools. So maybe eliminating those scores in the admission policy of those universities could alleviate the lack of affirmative or absence of affirmative action.
No, I don't think you should eliminate standardized test scores because we should continue to have standards. And if you eliminate them, then the sole criteria would be grade point average, which varies tremendously across schools and is also the product of intense grade inflation. So
Yes.
that wouldn't work. What I will say, though, is this. Chief Justice John Roberts said the way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to stop discrimination on the basis of race. I agree with Jeff that ideally we should live in a colorblind society, but we have not been a colorblind society for most of our history. So it's important to rectify these wrongs. And the reason I say that is this. If you go to Los Angeles, you can go to Beverly Hills High School and see all white kids in a prestigious school with all the resources they need in the world. 20 minutes away at Crenshaw High School, you see kids in impoverished schools with no educational opportunity whatsoever. And that's a product of a history of discrimination. So affirmative action, while not perfect, is there to at least in part give African Americans an opportunity to further themselves economically and educationally. And as one part of a holistic admissions process, that's a really important thing to do, to recognize the past inequities and to diversify classes, which benefits everyone.
Adam, this is a wonderful point. And as an immigrant, I will have to agree with you. And also, I would like to add that it's not only African Americans. We're also talking about a big Latino population and other immigrants. And on this point, I think it would be time to end our discussion on this topic. But prior to ending, I still would like to ask you to try to guess what would be the outcome, what would be the decision of those two cases, of that made into one case in regards to affirmative action that the Supreme Court is going to hear. Fernando, could you start?
I think that they are going to go against affirmative action. That's just the way this court is leaning towards. And the more decisions that they make in these veins, I think will lead to the court being expanded and adding more justices. That's just my opinion.
So, Fernando, you are thinking that the decision that Supreme Court is going to make, in your opinion, will affect its legitimacy in eyes of the public, as it did with Roe v. Wade?
Correct. The eyes of the public, eyes of senators, it's just going to happen. And I know Adam shook his head, but if you think back to when FDR was president, the last time they threatened to expand the court was when he was president, because similar things that are happening now were happening back then.
Thank you, Fernando. And Adam, your body movements indicate that you are very eager to respond, so we're listening to you. Take away.
The Supreme Court is going to vote 5-4 or 6-3 to invalidate affirmative action. Expanding the court is a terrible option. We don't need to be expanding the court or increasing its power. We need to be limiting the court's power. The court needs to stop hearing cases involving statutes and policies that don't plainly violate the Constitution and returning these issues to the democratic process and the people.
And Jeff, this issue is being returned to you. What do you think in regards to the Supreme Court's decision?
Well, like I said, I don't have any idea what they're going to decide. If I had to make a prediction, I agree with the other two panelists that said they're probably going to strike down or limit affirmative action programs. And I don't believe that is just because the Supreme Court is conservative. I think it is because the Supreme Court is originalist, and ultimately the fundamental premise of the 14th Amendment is that race is not relevant and that it shouldn't be taken into account in government policies. I don't think you get to a colorblind society by focusing on race.
Well, thank you very much for your points. I will add my opinion that unfortunately I will have to join all of you thinking that the Supreme Court is ready to eliminate the affirmative action. Hopefully we are ready for that as well. And as society, as community, we will work together on addressing those issues. Thank you for watching. For hot topic, the question is, and on the trial, we have two beverages, Coca-Cola and Pepsi Cola. Take it away. Let's start with Adam. Which one would you choose?
Neither. Diet Dr. Pepper, and you should be ashamed of yourself for giving such a narrow alternative.
Oh my gosh, such a classical drinks, and you are taking a fifth. Jeff, what do you think?
You know, growing up, I would have almost considered it heresy to pick Pepsi over Coke. As I have matured, I've decided that Pepsi is the better beverage, and I like it with a little grenadine in it. So that would be my choice.
Dr. Pepper. Fernando, will you pick Coca-Cola?
Let's see. Jeff is a heretic, and he should be burned at the stake. Coca-Cola is an American institution. It was the first and still the best in the land. Unfortunately, it took out the Coke element from Coca-Cola, but hey, we can't have everything.
Well, my point would be I would definitely choose Coca-Cola very sometimes, just because of those Christmas commercials when you have this big truck going with Santa Claus painted all over it and the beautiful Christmas music playing. I think it's a great legacy that United States has created. Unfortunately, it also has a lot of issues when it comes to monopoly and so on, but that's for other topics. Thank you so much for watching us. Stay safe, take care of yourself, and we will see you later. Bye-bye.